Namaste and greetings. I, Khwahish Kadyan, researcher at IMPRI, Impact and Policy Research Institute, Prabhav Evam Niti Anusandhan Sansthan, Nai Delhi, extend my warmest welcome to you all to IMPRI #Web Policy Talk. Today, we are gathered for a panel discussion on employment, livelihoods, and Union Budget 2022-2023, which is a part of the State of Employment and Livelihood #Employment Debate Series. This event is organized by IMPRI Center for Work and Welfare, CWW, IMPRI Impact and Policy Research Institute, New Delhi. I would like to extend a warm welcome to our invitees for the discussion. Chairing the panel discussion is Professor K. Seeta Prabhu, Visiting Professor and Senior Advisor, SDGs, Tata Institute of Social Sciences, Mumbai. We welcome you, ma'am. Moving to our esteemed panelists for today, we have with us Dr. Amrita Pillai, Independent Researcher, Consultant, National Council of Applied Economic Research, New Delhi. We are delighted to have you with us. Dr. Sandhya S. Iyer, Associate Professor and Chairperson, Center for Public Policy, Habitat and Human Development, Tata Institute of Social Sciences, Mumbai. We also extend a warm welcome to Dr. Sonia George, Secretary, Self-Employed Women's Association, SEWA, Kerala. Lastly, I would like to welcome our final panelist, Dr. Ranika Kapoor, Senior Visiting Fellow, Indian Council for Research on International Economic Relations, New Delhi. We welcome you all. We look forward to learning from our distinguished and esteemed panelists. I would now like to invite Professor K. Seeta Prabhu, our chair for the day, to initiate the discussion with her opening remarks and to take this panel discussion forward. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you very much. I think it's a pleasure to have this discussion soon after the budget. The past 48 hours, there's been a flood of discussion as well as webinars, as well as print media that we have been looking at the budget, much anticipated in a sense, because it is a post-COVID budget. And we do know that before 2024, this is a very important budget that can set the direction for the next 2 years. It's been called a booster budget by the Honorable Finance Minister. And what is it that we have? All of us are aware that there's been a big boost to capital investment in this budget, a whopping increase of about 35%, whereas the discussions prior to the budget have focused much more on the need to boost employment and demand. I think these were the two issues that consistently, there was a unanimity of opinions, surprisingly, across analysts, which you don't normally see, where there are 3 economists, there are 5 views normally, but you do find that these two were flagged all the time of demand management, because that seems to be a big issue. And while the government seems to think it's the supply side. They were, the multiplier with capital expenditure, capital investment is of course much higher than that of revenue expenditure. There is no doubt about it. And we do hope that the multiplier will take place, but how and what are the questions that we will discuss today. One more thing is that a much anticipated, increase or at least maintaining the allocations for Manrega have not materialized. In fact, it's quite silent on this front. And if you compare with the revised estimates, then of course it's much lower. They maintained around 73,000 crores, which seems to be the policy. And the pent-up demand that is there for the jobs in the rural area somehow seem to have got bypassed, despite the fact that a large number of migrants there's a reverse migration, and a large number have returned to the rural areas, crowding the agricultural sector and seeking work. Not all have returned to the towns and cities because the economy has not picked up adequately. And even when it does, we do not know. Now, there is also sort of a satisfaction that was evident all around, that we have got back to the track of pre-COVID times. Now, this is, it's welcome that at least growth has now come back. And even though it's slightly higher, 1.26% than the pre-COVID times, it is at least a positive direction, movement in the positive direction. But the normal that, if you can call it a normal, the pre-COVID times was not really a comfortable normal. It was itself problematic with decelerating growth rates, joblessness, and rising inequality. Now, if this is the normal that we are getting back to, then it would be problematic. Now, the main thing that I would like to say is that the jobs that are generated, even if the capital expenditure, capital investment is going to take place, we do not know, because bulk of the capital investment will be incurred at the state level, and in the federal structure, it is the states, 2/3 is incurred at the state level, and the federal structure, it will depend on the dynamism of the states and how much they are able to have capacity to spend. As it is, there are large surplus funds with the states which have remained unspent because of the pandemic, partly, and partly because of the lack of agility in terms of spending. So that is one question that will arise. The question of inequality is something that we need to address really seriously, because if you are looking at the Amrit Kal, 25 years from now, and the golden era, as it were, the golden era will not materialize if the the inequality continues to remain as it is, and it's completely a very serious. We don't seem to realize that it's so serious that it could, in many countries, it has affected social stability itself. So that part is something that we need to really look at. And some estimates like the IC 360 and so on survey have shown that the incomes of the poorest have declined in the past 5 years by over 50%, about 59% is what they say. And that of the richest have increased by 39%. So the accentuating of the income inequalities and also the inequality in capabilities, which we do not normally focus on, is also an issue that needs to be tackled. And one was hoping that the budget would recognize the issue and do something about it. But that seems to be a little bit of a challenge. Another issue that I really want to say, I don't want to take too much time from the panelists, but one issue is the magnitude. We seem to be dwelling in an era or in a comfort of averages. In a country like ours, averages do not really work, as all of you know. And the second is that we do not recognize the magnitude because we do not talk in the hundreds of millions that need help. If you look at India is now a middle-income country, and proudly so, lower middle-income country. And if you look at the poverty estimates, I mean, we don't have official poverty estimates after 2011-12, so one can hardly comment on it. But the World Bank has, for 2017, it has the poverty estimates. And for India as a middle-income country, the poverty line that is applicable reasonably is the $3.20 a day poverty line, and not really the 1.90 extreme poverty line. And now, if you want to compare ourselves with the countries like Laos and so on, then you can take the extreme poverty line. But logically, if it's a middle-income country, we have to judge ourselves against the middle-income poverty line. Now, the surprising fact, and something which is not very well noticed or highlighted, is that and these are World Bank estimates, so it's not government estimates, between the poverty lines of 1.90 and 3.20, you have a whopping 447 million people in the year 2017. So it is not something to be scoffed at. And if you take even the 2020, you take the multidimensional poverty estimates, which the Niti Aayog also approves of, it is 377 million people. Add to this the fact that a large number have fallen below the poverty line, which means estimates vary from 70 million to 120 million or so. But nonetheless, what I'm trying to say is that what we have and the people between these two poverty lines, this 470 odd million people, are the ones where the informal sector workers are located. They're the ones where the vulnerable population is located. They are the ones in the rural areas and semi-urban and peri-urban areas trying to eke out a living. The unemployment rate is often spoken about. It's about 9%, 8% historic highs. But then the really poor cannot afford to be unemployed because they eke out a living by any other means that they can find. So this 450 million, and if you look at it, it's the total population of US and Japan put together. This is the type of population that we have to, where the livelihoods and incomes have increased. And this is not residual poverty. It is not transient poverty. Some part of those who have fallen in because of COVID would be transient poverty. So the magnitude is huge, and the scale of our effort has to match the scale of the challenge. Otherwise, we are not going to get anything because we are only chipping away at the edges. One last point that I would like to say is that when you look at workers' incomes, livelihoods, are we really looking at them? What is the lens that you're using? Are we looking at them as a means to an end? A means which will, they will work and therefore the GDP will go up. And since our focus is on increasing GDP, there are means to increasing the GDP. Or really, if you look at it from the development point of view, are they the ends themselves? Development happens for whom? It happens for the people. And these are the most vulnerable people who need our attention and for whom development actually happens. So the lens that you adopt will make a change in the policies. Many state governments have now increased the working hours and the collective bargaining has gone for a toss. There is no collective bargaining. Wage compression has been happening. So if these are the types of issues that are there, and our lens has to also change to ensure equity, to ensure dignity to the workers, and to see them as ends of development rather than means alone. So I would request the panelists to keep these three dimensions in place about inequality, about the magnitude, and about the lens that we adopt before they, in their comments. I think I would invite Dr. Sandhya Iyer first. Each one will have about 10 to 12 minutes, and please do take that time. Thank you. Over to Sandhya.
Good morning, and thanks a lot, Professor Prabhu, for setting the ball rolling. In fact, these are very difficult questions that you have given to us. For the simple reason that even as the budget was initiated, we felt sometimes some text will spell out the word poor. The text will say migration. The text may say employment. We waited for about 90 minutes and the speech ended there. We went to the fine prints of the budget speech just to know perhaps there are some sentences maybe we didn't hear, but it's not really stated there. So if you're asking these tough questions on inequality, poverty, and what is the vision, I would like to start my discussion right from there. And to do this kind of answering, we need to again try to place ourselves in a very serious point. What was the importance of the budget this year? If it was really a booster, was it a booster meant for 9 months like the COVID vaccination boosters are talking about that every year we need to rely on it? Or are we trying to talk about a reconstruction budget? And that's what most G20 countries are talking about. We needed to have a reconstruction policy, a policy which will enable the livelihoods intersections with the economic activities, with the global systems. I think what also the COVID-19 pandemic brought to us was a set of very important points, that there has been a structural break of a serious kind in the industrial activities, in the services activities, owing to the lockdown. Perhaps some may argue that we couldn't keep some of the services going on and only certain essential services could be brought back to fore. Let's take that for the argumentative sake over here. Yet, even as we look at it and turn back around, we have seen that the chain between the organized and the unorganized, formal and the informal sector has broken down sharply. And there has been a lot of acceptance, and I think now it has reached a point of being rhetoric, that the informal sector is no longer getting the kind of attention, and the small and micro scale enterprises are reeling under pressure. And as you rightly pointed, that our diagnostic statements pre-budget were all alike. Most of us agreed upon the fact that our economic systems towards policy making require a relooking. As an economist, for me, it was disheartening just on the eve of the budget when you read headlines that now the economic problems have galloped so much that the role of economists have become too small. Maybe it's gone beyond the ambit of economists. I think, as you rightly said, the lens was a problem, and that lens seems to be perpetuating even when we open the economic survey. What are the things that the economic survey has highlighted? That we have come back to a recovery path, even acknowledging that there is a possibility of a K-shaped recovery. And the budget immediately on the next day ended up saying that if I strengthen the growing sectors, then the bottom up may catch up soon. And yes, employment may automatically get generated. This very idea that development will take place automatically seems to has become a dialect in the policy making. So what I wanted to state is three very important pointers. What was given to us at the time of the budget? What is expected in 2022-23? If our vaccination policies continue in a certain way, maybe we'll reach 80% fully vaccinated adult population. I'm taking a very conservative path because on a day-on-day basis, our vaccination rates are also coming down, right? And yet our governments are opening up economic activities. It comes to be a very stark point when I find that the very idea of what is structural has had very different kinds of receiving temperaments in the post-budget discussions. If you look at what the financial markets have done or the financial analysts have done, they have given a thumbs up to the budget. Why? Because according to them, the structural conditions needed for the macroeconomic recovery, which is emergency credit line guarantee schemes extended to the hospitality sector, capital expenditures enhanced for towards infrastructure development, again anticipating that in the next 4 to 5 years, things will improve. Okay, and of course, then they're talking about strengthening startup of the ecosystem of the startup sector, again talking about how we can have unicorns which will scale up the transition, failing to see that the business cycle models of startup ecosystem itself is on a very fragile footing. Then this, in fact, if you do a word count of the word digital in the budget, it has the highest word count in terms of the focal area. That itself indicates where the entire axis of budgeting and policy making has moved. You look at, you hear the words of expansion of digital technology, and markets gave it a complete thumbs up. Most of the financial media seem to be saying that yes, now we may improve ourselves financially, and this financial architecture will automatically strengthen the systems. Now, for a very back of the envelope calculation, I did a very small exercise. Last year, there were a string of financial support structure policy making, policy stimulus packages that were announced to improve small and micro scale enterprises offtake. There was a problem immediately. It was only the medium scale enterprises which seem to have benefited from the policy. Small scale and micro scale enterprises have not really been able to benefit from the fiscal stimulus that reached them. Owing to the fact, if you look at the outlays versus disbursement, there's a vast gap that has taken place even in that point. So even the expected credit line guarantee scheme, who is going to get and who benefit and how is it going to be tangibly changed is a huge question. But as labor economists, for me, the structural conditions are very different. I can't see this as a factor which will transform the employment position or the employment numbers in the labor market. What are the employer? What is the structure that we are sitting in? If I were to do a very straight matrix of the dominant sectors in India, agriculture in the rural areas, micro, small, medium, and startup ecosystems, say in the peri-urban and urban areas, I find a very clear-cut point problem here. Even now we are talking about a 60% workforce dependent on agriculture in the larger labor force. We are talking about the MSME, where M of micro constitutes about 30% of the total enterprises, small accounts for 20, and medium is a very small constituent because we are not being able to graduate the small scale enterprises to medium scale. So I'm not seeing what's going to happen again in 2022-23. If I look at it from the employment-unemployment problem, again, we have a strong number. I think we all, in fact, Radhika has been in some of the webinars earlier too, and she will agree on this, that we had a NEET problem, neither in jobs nor in employment in education institutions. The proportion has burgeoned itself to a significant number, and the youth are walking around with degrees without jobs. If this was to be the structure on which we discuss the entire point, and we talk about how there is unequal distribution of technology and capital in the enterprises today, prevalence of crippled micro enterprises, uncertainty in the agricultural sector clearly are the things which required focus in the policy making. And I would have hoped to see some fiscal statements on those lines. A visible problem, gender. Absolutely no policy making in terms of or statement as to how do you get women back into the labor market. What do we really need to do for girls who are not getting jobs? In fact, in a state-wise analysis, we find that leaving aside not in labor force data and just focusing on employment and unemployment figures, in several dominant industrial states such as Maharashtra, Gujarat, Karnataka, Kerala, Andhra Pradesh, Telangana, the unemployment rates of women is greater than those who are employed, which means they've come to the labor market and they have not got jobs. Why, what, and how do we need to do? Is there a certain gender budgeting that I could have seen? I'm sorry, the whole text comes and goes off in a very typical manner. Okay, this is one side of the problem. And as Professor Seeta and Prabhu just mentioned about this, maybe some of the capital expenditures will help us come out of these problems, that macroeconomic structural issues in the medium run. Couldn't there have been some protective social security mechanisms that could have been put together? Where is the discussion to address nutritional deficiency, malnourishment problems, food security issues, which were actually the demand for migrant workers in urban areas? They survived the wrath of COVID-19 because free food grains were being distributed to them. But if I'll take you to the budgets very shortly in the next 3 minutes, I'm sorry, Professor Prabhu, just give me I just want to kind of place 2 or 3 very important points here. There's very little mentioned about preventive social security or protective social security. And if you look at the social security budget per se, which would say what is the contribution towards subsidy to provide universal social security for all or health security for all, the budgets have significantly come down in the last 4 years. And I'm talking about actuals. I'll take you to the budget estimates very soon. Therefore, if I were to really talk about the bottom 40%, because today the bottom of the pyramid is bloated to encompass not only those who are in abject poverty, but those who are in the lower middle class who have fallen into poverty owing to the health crisis and perhaps the death of an earning member in the family. I think the budget should have been super sensitive about the fact that COVID has not been uniformly impacting everyone. Okay, so the point is, where do we really place these contestations of wage compression, new poverty, and those who have fallen below the poverty line from the low income group? And of course, even the middle class has come to the lower middle class, lower income strata today. So there has been a particular problem. Earlier, when I had presented a paper on the national income estimations, I found a very interesting point. Let's assume that we are going to address macroeconomic problems. I found a very important behavior in India. Our GDP of 8%, 7% projections, which are often being made as a very important achievement in media, is often an outcome of select quarters when changes can happen. What do I mean by that? Most of the time, the post-budget recovery of an economy is less than 1%. In fact, when I did an analysis from 2009 to 2020-21, you find that it is only in the final quarter, that is from December to the budget period, you find a significant growth rate in the GDP. And this time you find, as expected, we just had 2 or 3 front-running sectors where the growth rate was visible. The others have grown at less than 10%. So I'm not sure on what basis is this projection being made about India's recovery. And if recovery is going to be so poor, and if you compare it to the value addition that's being made in the dominant sectors, certainly our agricultural sector is going to be reeling under acute pressure. And informal sector, of course, has got a very raw deal. Based on these kind of broad pointers, I was looking at what has the budget done. The tax revenue between 2020 and 2021 and 2022 has increased by 8% from about 3,24,641, 32,46,411 to 35,08,291. So there has been a very tough task on the government's effort to enhance its tax revenues, despite imposing cesses on health and education of about 4%. And if you look at the cess tables in terms of how the annual financial statement mentioning, education and health cess accounts for the 3rd highest proportion of tax revenues for the governments for the past 8 years. Okay, so tax revenues need to be bolstered if we need anything to be done in case of welfare regimes, and government is not doing enough. It's certainly not doing enough for this. On the one hand, we are struggling with tax revenues. On the other hand, when I look at social sector provisioning, it has increased by about 9%. I'm looking at budget estimates. I'm not even comparing revised with budgets. It's increased only by about 9% across all social sectors. Tough. If you look at the agricultural sector, after the large one whole year of farmers' distress, we would have expected a serious amount of rethinking in the budget to allocate resources for the agricultural sector. Agricultural sector budgeting has come down by 3% between the 2 years. So allocations in agricultural sector are down at a time when we are talking about crop failure, at a time when we are talking about building great value chains of food and food supplies. Food storage and warehousing budget has come down by about 40%. So where do the farmers save their food crops, and where is the food security? Even the MSPs that are being provided for are not even reaching 30% farmers. And this is a serious issue. So if we are talking about doubling farmers' income, how do we double it for all? Third point.
Yeah, can you conclude now? Yeah.
Just one more point, and I would like to flag some questions and close it, ma'am. Similarly, if you look at the insecurities and uncertainties of rural distress, agricultural financial institutions budget has come down. Rural employment towards Manreka budgets have remained at the same level, though they may say that the budget allocations will go up. Last point, but not the least. COVID was an urban phenomenon, is what we all said, and we were all told that it all starts in slums, right? It started because of concentration of population. Urban budget has gone up by only about 2.5%. I don't want to really look at whether the budget seeks to bring about a radical change, but it talks about the political will that the government is allocating towards resources. I'm not very sure whether the Keynesian understanding of crowding in of private investments will come in with this paltry public investment. But certainly, there is also crowding out of expenditure at the federal systems. We find local governments and state governments not investing in the same sectors, which they should have otherwise done. So I feel that the central government budgets should have provided a much more sheath-hanging process or a leadership process of demonstrating what they meant by these budgets in the booster years. If the central government does this, I don't know what to expect from local body budgeting. Thank you so much, ma'am.
Thank you very much, Sandhya. You have really highlighted the fact that it should be a reconstruction budget rather than only a booster budget. And your question of whether we need repeated boosters, if this is the pattern of investments that we are making, and these are the priorities, is worth really debating, which we'll do later. May I now invite Dr. Ranika Kapoor to make her presentation.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Am I audible?
Yes, yes, you
are. Excellent points made by Sandhya ma'am as well. I think she's pretty much made many of the points that I wanted to make. But let me just, start with what the basic strategy that came out of the budget was. Since our discussion is focusing on employment and livelihoods, the principal thinking from the side of the government, it appears, is that let's boost capital expenditure, let's boost infrastructure investment, and in the process of doing that, we are firstly going to create some kind of demand in the economy because for industries which provide inputs into this sector, be it cement, steel, all sorts of construction materials, there will be demand which will be created. Eventually, in the long run, we will enhance the productive capacity of the economy, and in that process, we will also crowd in private investment. Now, on the face of it, this seems like a very sound strategy macroeconomically, and more so because if we go back to the pre-pandemic time of 2019-20, we know that India had been witnessing a growth slowdown. In fact, the National Account Statistics revised the GDP estimates just the day before the budget, and what they told us was that in 2019-20, India actually grew at 3.7% and not even 4%. And a large part of this slowdown was essentially driven by the slowdown in private investments since the global financial crisis. So given this slowdown in investment, given that private investment has not been going up, the strategy, therefore, of boosting public investment and therefore, hoping to crowd in private investment makes sense. There was also the discussion, like Seeta ma'am said, about, demand versus supply. And some kind of thinking, therefore, would have also been that when you do this kind of public investment in infrastructure, it is, in a sense, a form of demand stimulus for certain industries, which then have a multiplier effect in the economy. So, all of that actually sounds, the focus on growth and therefore job creation, on the face of it sounds really great. But I think the devil really here lies in the details. Is this in fact going to happen? Now, I think, the biggest question mark over here is that when we do this sort of investment, and the focus was all on this Gati Shakti program, which in fact got, infrastructure investment, in particular transport, got such huge allocations that, as somebody noted in one of the newspapers yesterday, the allocation for transport exceeds that of agriculture, education, and health combined. I think it was the leading op-ed of Business Standard itself. The thing is that a lot of these, very glamorous infrastructure projects, which are going to build the sort of temples in modern India, they all have very long gestation periods. We know from our past experience how many delays, 400-500 days delays these projects run into. We also know that these projects are very capital intensive in nature. So the firms which are actually going to get these projects are basically, again, going to be the large corporates which have been doing very well. So is this actually going to create the employment that we need in the immediate term, in the short term, given the crisis of joblessness that we have now been discussing on this forum for, I think, 2-3 years now? So while in the medium term, it might translate into some gains, does it tackle the problem which is there in the immediate term? I don't think it is going to have that impact because, all these things are going to take time to fructify. We know that the government's past record of spending vis-a-vis capital expenditure has also not been that promising, because if you look at the numbers last year, the allocation was about 5.5 lakh crores. And as per the data on the CAG website, even as of November 2021, just about 50% of that amount had been spent. So while we are allocating on spending on CapEx, which we hope to create jobs with, whether the government actually has the ability to spend productively and do that capital expenditure is a big question mark. The second is that if you actually look again in the details, this huge increase of this 35% outlay that we are seeing, about half of it is coming through interest-free loans to states. So there's a 1 lakh crore interest-free loan to the states for capital expenditure. So in some sense, the central government is now also putting the ball in the state government's courts. And here again, I think, we all know, and Seeta ma'am flagged this as well, the ability of the state governments to spend has been quite limited. As we have seen, they are actually sitting on a reasonable amount of money, but for a variety of reasons, including restrictions on account of COVID and so on, they actually haven't been able to spend. So therefore, whether we will be able to follow through this strategy of creating more jobs via capital expenditure in the immediate term is something that I don't think which is going to fructify. And then for the private investment to kick in, that's going to take another 18 to 24 months. There is, to me, it sounds like a dicey strategy also because, basically it appears that the government has put all its eggs in one basket. That is of capital expenditure, because if you actually look at the revenue expenditure has actually declined. So even though we have increased the capital expenditure, we have seriously compressed revenue expenditure on public goods at the expense of capital expenditure. And I'll get into a little bit of the implications of that in a bit. And in fact, if you look at the expenditure as a share of GDP, and you do a comparison of B to B, 2021-22 and 2022-23, there is actually a decline over there. And if you do RE to a B comparison, there is a 1 percentage point decline if you look at the share of expenditure to GDP. So in that sense, the idea that the government is really going out and spending more to boost growth is a little misleading when you look at, depending on which statistics you choose to look at. And so one can understand why it is that 35% increase in outlay, which sort of was said in the budget to concede the details. The other interesting thing is that though they are talking about the strategy is one of boosting public investment to drive employment, if you actually look at another item and this is like statement 1 of the expenditure profile of the budget, you look at the capex of public sector enterprises. That capex of public sector enterprises has in fact declined. That has gone down from 5.02 lakh crores RE to 4.69 lakh crores BE for the coming financial year. So there is some kind of dichotomy which is happening over here. And I'm really, the more one reads and the more one looks at the fine print, one is a little concerned about whether this is really going to bear fruit. So that's on the capex side. Now, if one steps back and thinks of, it appeared when the finance minister spoke that obviously they take the GDP numbers at face value, and they believe that India has now gone back to pre-pandemic levels of GDP. And for a moment, let's take those aggregates at face value. But like Seeta ma'am said, you can't take these aggregates and averages in India at face value because there are so many discrepancies. And when you disaggregate things, that's when you realize the real distress in the economy. And this 9.2% advanced estimate that we are seeing, or the fact that the GDP is now at is projected to be at 147 lakh crores, up from 145 lakh crores in 2019-20, what this is hiding is that that entire recovery, the so-called recovery, is essentially driven by the growth of the corporate sector, by a few large corporates in the formal sector. And as we all know, it's a K-shaped recovery. And the pity is that, it is this K-shaped recovery which has not been factored into the macroeconomic strategy or the fiscal policy of the government. And I think, Sandhya ma'am has put out a lot of the figures which already support this, and their social sector spending has declined. The spending for safety nets has remained the same in nominal terms, which means that it's not even going to keep up with inflation and in fact decline in real terms. The fact that outlays for Narega have not increased is, of course, a huge disappointment, because what we know is that there is a serious crisis in rural India. There is a demand problem there. The demand problem is so severe that we even see captains of corporate India and chambers of commerce in the pre-budget discussions. They went all out and said that, increase allocation on Narega because they realize that this problem of demand will eventually hurt these corporates in their profitability. And ironically, these were the same people who, when Narega was introduced, talked about how it had actually increased wages and hurt their profitability. So, the crisis in rural India, the problem of demand from those at the bottom was so severe that even corporate India saw it and was making a demand for increased allocation of Narega, which was really quite ironic. But so I think, this is the fact that we have chosen to ignore the distress at the bottom is deeply disturbing. It's disturbing because of ethical reasons. It's disturbing for moral reasons. But it's also very disturbing for economic reasons. We are not talking about inequality simply for ethical reasons alone. Eventually, there is a large body of empirical evidence the world over that tells us that inequality, in fact, retards growth. And again, inequality, there are different dimensions through which it's going to play out in India. One is the demand side, like I said, because if you have a recovery which is concentrated in just the top 150 million, whereas the rest are languishing, where is the demand in the economy going to come from? We know again from the advanced estimates for 2021-22 that the per capita private final consumption expenditure was 5% lower than even 2019-20. I mean, that in itself is a very telling statistic of the problem on the consumption side. And you might argue that, over the last year, our exports have done well. And to that extent, we have relied on external demand as a driver of growth. But we also know that looking forward, global growth, there are some serious downsides to global growth, and the ability of exports to therefore pull us through in the coming year is quite limited. So one important reason for us to tackle this problem of inequality, the fact that the bottom half has suffered disproportionately, is important from a consumption perspective. And of course, there is a social dimension to that, and there is an ethical dimension to that. And those are things we really cannot afford to ignore, given the sort of, the fact that we've recently seen what can be described as the first unemployment riots in the country. So all of this does need to be factored in. The second thing that I want to talk about, which is related more to a long-term strategy vis-a-vis employments and livelihoods and so on, is that this budget sought to lay out a roadmap for 25 years. So it went over and above the 5-year plans, and now we're talking about 25-year plans. And in this vision of India for the next 25 years, physical infrastructure got a lot of attention. Digital got a lot of attention. But sadly, I mean, it's not just the budget allocations for 2022-23, where we didn't see an increase in things like education and health, but also in the vision of India that we see for the next 25 years, we just don't see enough. It appears that it's only physical capital that matters, but human capital it doesn't seem to have that kind of attention, and the entire focus seems to be on digital. And the reason I want to emphasize this vis-a-vis the employment problem is that, very often when we describe what is it why we haven't generated enough jobs, why we haven't done well on things like labor-intensive manufacturing, and we'll always put the blame on things like infrastructure, which is indeed correct. We will talk about, labor laws, which I don't agree with the dominant narrative on. But what we often forget is that part of the reason that India has not been able to convert its comparative advantage in labor into a competitive advantage and do well in labor-intensive manufacturing is because we actually have never invested enough in education and healthcare. And this is not something which is, just that has happened over the last 15, 20 years. I mean, consistently, in our strategies, I mean, we've underestimated in education and health, and that hurts the competitiveness of our labor. So when we are talking about enhancing the competitiveness of our economy, yes, we have to build infrastructure. Yes, we have to reduce, the bottlenecks to doing business and reduce the costs of doing business. But at the same time, unless the workforce has a basic level of literacy, a basic level of industrial literacy, we cannot do well in things like labor-intensive manufacturing. And I think it's very disappointing that even in this grand vision, beyond budgetary allocations for the coming financial year, we see no mention of things like education and healthcare. Now, two more things I want to focus on is, particularly vis-a-vis job creation, is that it appears that the government is hoping that the PLI scheme is going to generate a lot of employment in India. And the finance minister alluded to the PLI scheme in her speech several times. Now, arguably, of course, there will be some jobs which will be created. But I think here too, the trouble with the PLI scheme, of course, it's been hotly contested. People are talking about whether it's indeed the right way to go. It marks the return of industrial policy, which is something that we are seeing the world over now, not just something in India. And I, for one, don't disagree with the idea of picking up specific sectors and boosting them in order to effect structural transformation in a particular direction, which India does need. But having said that, in terms of, again, creating jobs in the next 4 or 5 years, these are all the sectors which have been chosen in PLI are highly capital intensive. So I don't see how we are going to create the kind of jobs that we need. Also, the focus vis-a-vis the implementation of this scheme. While we are giving these huge concessions for enhancing production, which I think amount to almost 2%, over the next 5 years, we're going to give almost 2% of GDP to this PLI scheme. I would have actually been happier if this would have been linked to something like employment, because this would have given a more tangible return vis-a-vis employment creation instead of doing production. Because production link then also creates problems vis-a-vis, are you WTO compliant? Because some of this is linked to exports and so on. So if you want to spend and you want to do active labor market policies to tackle the kind of joblessness crisis that we have at the moment, perhaps linking some of this to employment would have given you better gains. But broadly still, I think the scheme has limits in terms of job creation because of the nature of industries which have been chosen. And also because, electronics, for example, one industry which the government has constantly been focusing on, it's gone from the phased manufacturing program to PLI, and they're hoping a lot of jobs will create out of it. A lot of the key inputs that are needed to be able to produce those are actually subject to very high tariffs. Now, there was some amount of course correction, but I think that the tariff structure, rationalization of the tariff structure to ensure that the industries which are selected for PLI can actually perform and produce, and therefore create some amount of employment is required, because you cannot pursue a strategy of export promotion, which I think we have to, given the domestic demand problem. We can't pursue the strategy of export promotion with concomitantly pursuing a strategy of import substitution.
Radhika, another couple of minutes, you'll come.
Yes, just one final point I have. Now, so in the scheme of things vis-a-vis job creation, there is the PLI, which talks about the large corporates. And then there is the MSMEs. And the MSMEs are the ones which really employ a significant share of total employment in India today. They are also more labor intensive in nature. And these are the ones which have really suffered over the last 2 years. And I want to go back to what Sandhya said here before, that the only support they have got is through the ECLGS scheme. And the finance minister in her speech spoke about how I think 130 lakh MSMEs were provided support under these schemes. And the allocation has now been increased to cover the hospitality sector, which is something which I do welcome, because again, trade, hotels, restaurants, all of these account for a reasonable share, about 10% of employment in the PLFS data. These were contact intensive services, and they have not gone back to pre-pandemic levels. So a lot of youth, especially who was engaged in these sectors, have been pushed back into the agricultural sector as they have returned back to their villages. And so, I welcome that. But having said that, I think one important point to mention here is that when the government actually first announced this ECLG scheme under Atmanirbhar Bharat in 2020, it also revised the definition of what MSMEs were. And it basically increased the threshold for investment in plant and machinery and added turnover as a category. As a result of these changes to the definition, a lot of large units came under the ambit of MSMEs. And like Sandhya pointed out, what has happened is that basically, even under this ECLG scheme, if you see some of the credit which has been allocated from some RBI data, you find that a large percentage of it has actually gone into the larger enterprises in the MSME group. So it is the medium ones or the creamy layer of the MSMEs which have got this credit. But the ones who've really been hurting, which is the micro enterprises, those which we have these complex definitions in India, but globally it's about micro enterprises typically hire 1 to 9 workers. And I'm counting out the self-employed from this group who operate without any hired labor. I mean, that's really where there is a lot of distress. And these guys have got no support at all. So I would have hoped that there could have been some sort of fiscal support provided to the micro enterprises, because by clubbing this whole group together, quite frankly, we've done a huge disservice to the micro enterprises. And these are the ones really which do need support, even in terms of job creation, because given the pitiable situation that we're in now, I mean, just for these enterprises to stay afloat and be able to retain a few workers on their payrolls, it can give a long way in giving some sort of buffer, which is really so pressing, given that other safety nets have not got my allocation in the budget. So I think I'll just stop here and we can discuss some of this later.
Thank you very much, Radhika. I think a very comprehensive presentation. And you're right that in the long run, as Lord Keynes had said, that we're all dead. And the budget is more about the annual statement, expenditure and revenue statement, whereas we have gone ahead for 25 years. And also we seem to be following very simplistic model, textbookish in a sense, that you increase capital expenditure and lo and behold, you will have employment. In a complex country like ours, with so many structural constraints, this will not, it's not automatic. And even if it's automatic, it's not going to be in the short run. Apart from that, you also highlighted the problems with relating to the MSMEs in great detail. So thank you very much for that. Now, can I invite Amrita Pillai, please, to make her comments?
A very good afternoon to everyone here. I just want to check if I'm audible.
You are audible.
Thanks. I'm so glad to be a part of this eminent panel of scholars and practitioners. I'd like to especially thank Dr. Arjun Kumar and his team at IMPRI for organizing this discussion. I'm a lawyer by training, and as such, I tend to examine the subject of labor and livelihoods through a socio-legal lens, which is what I'm going to use for this discussion also. Insofar as the budget for FY23 goes, I think the only sort of serious or important intervention with at least intent and potential for jobs creation would be higher capital investment, which I think Dr. Prabhu has already brought up, which is now proposed to be around 2.8 to 2.9% of GDP. At the beginning of the speech, the FM did mention that the union government plans to create 6 million jobs over 5 years. That plan, however, seems to ignore an already existing shortage of jobs, I think, firstly in the lead up to the pandemic, and also the pandemic induced sort of collapse in jobs. The CMIE says, for instance, that 8 million young individuals will be joining the labor market each year. In ignoring these facts, I think what is also unrecognized and therefore also being not addressed is that India generally has a lower labor participation rate and a low employment rate. So, what that means is that there is a much smaller proportion of the working age population that wants to work, is willing to work compared to global norms itself. India's growth story is also, as we know, very uniquely placed in that there has been rapid growth in decades from before, but it hasn't led to commensurate sort of increase in addition of jobs on a net basis. In fact, we have seen a shrinking workforce even. As per CMI, again, the LPR, the labor participation rate in 2017 was around 47%. Which fell to a dramatic 40% in 4 years itself in 2021. So I think policymakers, need to take cognizance of this reality and sort of analyze employment and, these kind of issues, abysmally lower, participation rates, etc., but also the quality of this employment, right? And the income of those who are in the active labor force also. I think that is what is necessary to sort of develop a more cohesive policy that can correct both harm from the past and also build on job creation, income security in the near future, in the next 5 or 10 years to come. That being said, I want to now shift focus to the labor reform agenda that has been, according to the government, brought about by the labor codes itself. And the reason I want to focus on that, of course, there was no mention of it in this budget. That's because in budget 21, I think the FM said that it's already been implemented, and therefore it seems that the agenda is therefore complete. However, I want to focus on it now because these codes are essentially now the legal architecture within which all employment will be regulated, and therefore I have a few comments on that. There is, of course, no dispute on the fact that the rationalization and simplification of labor laws was necessary. It had to be done. There were multiple laws that were causing, huge compliance costs for employers. Previously, definitions of key stakeholders like the employer, the worker, the establishment, the unit, wages even, were defined in several different ways, and it led to unnecessary litigation costs for workers, payment delays to workers, etc. So now what has been done is there are around 29 central laws that have been codified into 4 codes, one each on wages, social security, occupational safety, health and working conditions, and industrial relations. Labor, as we know, is a concurrent subject and under the Constitution, and therefore the rules have to be notified by both the center and the states. Primarily, I think it is because of the run-up to the elections in key states that the rules haven't been notified yet. So in terms of implementation, that's where we are. And I'm certain that that's the reason it didn't come up in the budget this time either. There was absolutely no mention of it. The central challenge to labor regulation really is on how to provide sufficient rights to workers while creating an enabling environment that can facilitate firm output, firm growth, all while creating more jobs. And enterprises should also find it easy to sort of adapt to changing business environments and also be able to change their employment levels, commensurately. At the same time, all workers, irrespective of their mode of employment with their employer, need protection on various counts, be that assured wages, be it social security, be it reduction in job insecurity, health and safety standards, etc., etc. Also, a mechanism for collective bargaining rights, that's absolutely crucial. And for all of these, what you do need is a labor administration, one that can efficiently manage conflicts between employers and workers, and also enforce all the rights that are laid down in laws and codes. Now, while the codes do consolidate laws in some of these aspects that I mentioned, in my opinion, they fall short on several grounds, and on very crucial ones, in fact. In the interest of time, I can't get into each one of these, so I've just picked two, which I think might be relevant to the discussion on livelihoods itself. The first aspect that I want to talk about is coverage. Most labor laws apply to establishments that have, in terms of size, that have more than 10 workers, 10 or more. Now, while size-based thresholds typically help firms in reducing compliance burden, what it also does is it enables sort of perverse incentives to evade worker protections that would ideally have to apply to all units. Now, these could, incentives could be social security, it could be wages, etc. Healthy conditions of employment, etc., etc. The context here is important for this because 99% of micro, small, and medium enterprises, which we have already discussed, Dr. Sandhya brought it up, and so did Dr. Kapoor. 99% of MSMEs are micro, and they are informal also. They typically employ less than 10 workers. In sheer number, what this means is there are around 60 million of these units in India. In terms of coverage, the labor codes on wages and industrial relations do apply to these units. But what's also happened is the codes on social security and occupational safety do not apply to them because they only apply to units that are, that employ, more than 10 workers. That's a very dangerous proposition. It defeats the entire purpose of sort of universal coverage. Also, I want to bring, to everybody's notice that the National Commission on Labor, which was the second one in 2002, had actually recommended a separate law for these kind of units. They had said that irrespective of, how many workers you employ, you should at least have, even if less stringent, at least have some basic provisions on wages, on welfare facilities, on retention and closure, on resolution of disputes, etc. Which effectively meant that irrespective of how small you are or how many people you employ, you do not bypass these standard requirements of how you take care of your workers. The second aspect that I think the code, the codes, all four of them, do not sufficiently address is contractual labor. Typically, the argument is that labor compliance and economic sort of considerations have led to an increase in contract labor. The share of contract workers among total workers in factories itself have increased from 26% to 36% in the period 2004-5 to 2017-18. In the same period, the share of directly hired workers has also fallen from 74% to 64%. Contract labor is, as we know, denied basic protections such as assured wages even, and are not even entitled to be regularized in certain states that actually don't recognize them. Now, the Industrial Relations Code introduces certain provisions on something called fixed term employment, made big headlines. Fixed term employment essentially refers to workers employed for a fixed duration, of course, based on a contract signed between the worker and the employer. They receive the same benefits under the employee as an employee under the code. As fixed term employees, you would have medical insurance, you would have pension, and your conditions of work had to be the same as employees of that particular unit. Now, this would obviously help improve the conditions of temporary workers in comparison to contract workers who may not be provided any of this at all. However, there are certain features inherent to the Indian labor market that I think in introducing fixed term employment, policymakers have missed. One is the unequal bargaining power between the worker and the employer itself. Ultimately, the power to renew these contracts also lies with the employer. There is therefore job insecurity for the fixed term employee also that has not been corrected, which may further deter him from, or her raising issues about unsafe work practices, wages being denied, leaves being denied, etc. There is also no restriction on the type of work which may be classified under fixed term employment. Again, the second, NCL, the National Commission on Labor, had highlighted that no worker should be kept continuously under this form of employment, which is casual or temporary, for let's say a successive period of 2 years or more. Fixed term employment is used by several countries It's not surprising that India has also introduced it. However, they always come with certain restrictions on how much they can be used. For instance, some have a restriction on how many times these kind of contracts can be renewed. So you can renew it for 2 successive terms and thereafter no more. Or it could be the duration of this contract. It can only be for 11 months and no more. Sometimes it is also the proportion of fixed term employment as total employment. I think Italy has that. So out of your total workforce, not more than 20% can be on fixed term employment at any given point in time. And therefore all units have to comply. The idea is to say that while it's okay for this to grab headlines, the idea is not new. There still have to be some restrictions in place to ensure that all contract doesn't move into fixed term. That really doesn't seem like the solution to the problem itself. Our codes don't incorporate any of these restrictions, and they haven't incorporated the NCL's recommendations in this regard either. I would just like to end with saying that given the predominance of the unorganized workforce in our country, and the fact that we have had jobless growth for a while now, we have been witnessing it for a while now, we need not just an employment-centric growth agenda, which was missing in this budget, as we may all agree, but we also need to focus on the quality of this employment itself, the income security it's providing to people, in different economic sectors. So with that, I'll end my comments for this session.
Thank you very much, Amrita. I think you brought in a very important issue of labor codes and what ought to be done. And also the fact that the entire lens is missing from this current budget. The lens on employment itself is missing. And within that, that of the labor codes is, of course, even more missing. And then we'll get back to the discussion after, Sonia makes, let's listen to a practitioner who can give us a feel of the issues on the ground. So Sonia George, please, can you start your presentation, please? Can you speak? Yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Seeta. Am I audible?
Yeah, you are audible. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you for inviting me to be part of this panel, and thank you for all other panelists for bringing relevant points for the discussion today. And I don't want to repeat. I think most of the things even I also wanted to share was laid down by different panelists and also the moderator herself. Maybe looking at the data and looking at somebody means who is on the field and working with the people, especially the workforce, means we are supposed to work on the informal labor force in this country. This budget seems to be utterly disappointing in that sense. That could be the first thing. And one could speak about the politics of the budget. That is very important. Means what is the politics that we are talking about? Means in the context of the elections that are coming up. In the context of our politics that we are talking every day in terms of ruling or opposition or whoever it is. So this budget has to be placed in that particular context, despite COVID, means pandemic or pre-pandemic situations, or the growth that we really had, the original figures, and how could the economic surveys and the budget figures always could extrapolate from a different tangent points that we never expected to come up. That is always the case. We had seen soon after the COVID, we had seen a dip of the GDP, means a very negative rate of GDP, and now we are seeing growth rate of GDP at different rates. Even we haven't recovered from the severe impacts of COVID. At this situation also, we are facing this third wave very severely in the country. Basically, when we means the PM, the FM, while during her budget speech yesterday, she was saying that I would like to quote her. Means there are times when you can give relief. But there are times when it will have to wait a bit longer. What she was expecting from that statement, such a statement, that means she herself understands, or she's explicitly saying that you don't have to expect anything, but wait, that was the message that she was supposed to give. That was clearly visible, as you all have mentioned, through the allocation of MNREGA, and also to the rural development, social protection mechanisms, all this allocation that have been, and so much focus, so much stress on the public expenditure that the FM was laying on increasing public expenditure, depending on the supply sides, and nothing on the demand sides that she was mentioning continuously. So one thing that was missing is no such linkages between the local economy and the micro macro linkage was not at all made at any levels. Means we talk about agriculture, after more than 1 year of constant struggle of the farmers in this country, and with so much beautiful, so much of agreeable agreements that have been made with them, we have seen the kind of MSPs that have been announced, means how it is lower than what was there, means existing for them during the previous years, and what kind of negotiation that had taken place that was well understood. And also when we talk about MNREG, means all the times we were expected, and the MNREG activists also were saying, we need an extension of MNREG like policy to the urban level. But the urban city, the smart city promises, and increasing concentration on urbanization, and calling people that there are enough jobs in the urbanization process that we are propagating. That means there is no such employment guarantee activities that have been mentioned. More or less, we are saying too much targets on machineries, too much target on technology, whereas means what is the share of the manual workers? That is not visible at any level of discussions. How many, means we talk about 6 million jobs that is going to be created, but what is going to happen to the existing labor force? The COVID statistics itself will have revealed that the kind of job losses that had happened in the country, especially the women labor force, how they are suffering in the country, means even 2/3 of the women labor force that who have been out of the labor market during the COVID situation have not come back to the labor market. And the stimulus packages, especially, means we have noticed it from the beginning that the stimulus packages have been concentrating extensively on MSMEs. There have been a lot of things discussed by Sandhya ma'am and also Ranika ma'am on MSMEs. I don't want to repeat it again. But one thing that we have to look at the concentration. Here again, I would like to bring the politics that was mentioned, means so much on medium enterprises, but not on small or micro enterprises, means this entire politics is based on we are talking about the higher level of the population, the employers who are the decision makers. That is these packages on this emergency credit line schemes. How many of the micro enterprises are going to benefit from the emergency credit line schemes? I can say it's 0%, but most of the medium enterprises are going to gain benefit from the emergency credit line scheme. So, and when you look at one of the other things that for the last 2-3 months, the entire workforce have been forced to register on the eShram portal. That is something that is happening. But when you look at how these processes have been integrated, as Amrita was also saying on the recent labor law reforms that had happened in the country, in terms of integrating the social security schemes that is coming under the eShram, and also the MSME portals that had been created. The minister has mentioned that these processes will be integrated in the process, means under the Atmanirbhar Bharat Rozgar Yojana. That is what she was saying yesterday. But I think when you look at it, this integration process is not clearly mentioned, so that again medium enterprises are going to gain rather than this so-called migrant women, marginalized labor force in the country. That is also, again, because that will supply through the e-shram portals, labor will be supplied to medium enterprises. That is what the reflection is going to happen at this level. And when you look at resources, that is something, nothing that is mentioned. How the country is going to use the resources that are common, means, for example, the forest resources of this country, the ocean of this country, means the entire sea, the common resources of this country. How could, and the people who are looking completely on their livelihood based on the resources that are supplied from the common pools, means, and other natural resources of the country. So nothing like that, means how could this create employment mechanisms to people, means, who are at the bottom levels of the pyramid, means that is not at all mentioned in any of these schemes that we are coming about. We again and again we talk about NREG, MNREG, means what are the outcomes that we have achieved after so many years of MNREG process. Skills, means ease of doing business is mentioning in different parts of the program. Even though the World Bank has struck out the ease of doing index itself, India government is again talking about ease of doing access. And then we have talked about, means we have discussed about another jargon, that is Make in India. So this Make in India process, again, it was related to the skill development process. But none of this direct institutions are linked, or the government has not analyzed what had happened to these systems, which was announced in the last 2-3 years of budget of Skilling India, Make in India, all these programs, and now they go to this India, means Vision India 100, that process, without mentioning any of these schemes. So that seems to be what means completely disappointing in the process, that when you talk about public investments and saying that you are selling means public sector enterprises like LIC, Life Insurance Corporation, Air India is already sold, LIC and other such schemes are put into the private capital intensive markets, and we are talking about disinvestments at a very high level. What are you talking about? Means it was mentioned again about the PLI scheme, productivity, means based on incentive based on productivity. Means again, whom we are talking about? The PLI beneficiaries. Who are the PLI beneficiaries? Means with majority of the people, means in the informal economy, more than 70% under the informal economy, they suffer from lack of skills, lack of proper workplace, lack of stable work, and lack of proper income. That is what was the result of all these policies like Make in India and Digital India that we have been talking about. And most of the women workforce in the country, they couldn't go to work because of the pandemic situation the last 2 years. Means children were completely, the entire family was supposed to be completely depending on the inner house situation that was mainly controlled by the women in the family, and most of them have lost their workforce. And when the country talked about work from home process to the upper middle class level of workers in the country, the poor home-based workers who are sitting at home and earning a livelihood, means out of the 45 million workforce who are the home-based workers, and majority of those workers are women. These workers are pushed out of their labor when the entire pandemic and the lockdown situations were restricted. The movement of the people and the movement in terms of work in the country. So none of these sectors have been discussed at any levels. For example, social security, means we have been demanding for social security for people who have not been no income taxpayers for such a long time. Support, long-term income support and long-term social security support for such people. But when you see the reduction in the social sector itself, in terms of pension, means we expected that there will be at least 200 or 300 rupees increase in pension payments for the old or the widowed or the informal sector workers in the country. There was no such announcement being made in the budget. Health benefits, means insurance schemes, for the informal sector workforce in the country. None of such cases have been not explained, and majority of these people completely boost the local economy. That was the entire agriculture sector that was sustaining the country during the pandemic. But that was not described, or that was not highlighted at any level of the budget presentation. Instead, infrastructure growth. Who is going to benefit from infrastructure growth? Means PM Gati Shakti project like railways or transportation. How can we talk about such high-level projects when majority of the poor people in the country have no food? Nothing mentioning about the Food Security Act or the public distribution system. We expected that. For example, for migrant workers, there was a kind of system announced that the portability of the ration card, one nation, one ration card. So we expected that, as part of that, increasing provisions for food security, like increasing provisions in the public distribution system will be announced that would benefit the majority of the migrant workers who are going from one state to another in search of livelihoods. But there was no such mention on increasing allocation for the public distribution system, or increasing the food capacity of the people, means especially the demand. How do we increase the private demand without employment, without modes of livelihood, without any kind of social security? And the out-of-pocket allowances that people had to spend during the pandemic. They couldn't, means maybe few states like Kerala or so could support the people in terms of public health, but majority of the people had their spending, means out-of-pocket allowances, in terms of health, in terms of nutrition, and it was not, means those kind of basic needs of the people. When you talk about infrastructure development, how do we talk about basic needs? Without addressing basic needs, how can we have an infrastructure which is going to address only 50 to 20% of the population that we are talking about? So the entire budget is full of this kind of contradictions, indifference. That is, I think that will be a better term to mention. I think that this approach, indifference, that is what we are looking at. So I think at this juncture we have to really discuss about, or we have to, as Seeta ma'am was saying about, means in whose lens that we are looking at the entire budget, means who are the real beneficiaries of the budget. And I'm sure it is maybe the 20%, the big industries, the medium industries, the employers in this country, and nothing for the poor, nothing for the informal sector, and nothing, means for the women, means in terms of pay gaps, in terms of ESI, means as Amrita has said, the Social Security Code and the Occupational Safety Code means it had left out the informal sector workers of this country completely. That means who's going to pay for the social security of the informal sector workers?
Yeah, Dr. Sonia, can you conclude?
So this is what we have to really analyze when the budget discussions are going on, and how are we going to build up from this counterpoints that we have been gathering at this point, and hope our discussions will bring us forward in gaining that momentum. Thank you.
Thank you, Sonia. I think there has been a wide-ranging discussion, and you have brought in the issues of micro and macro linkages, and also for whom is this budget. I think the entire issue, if I may, before passing it on to the questions part, I would just say that in the lack of planning mechanism and the lack of any employment policy, particularly we don't have an employment policy for a country of this size, and a country with such informal sector workers, and over 90% being in the informal sector, and we have no policies, and therefore we are all trying to read from the budget some policy statements. You see, each one of us has done it in our own way, that we are trying to read, interpret policy from a budget. Budget is about expenditure and revenue. Maybe it gives a little direction for that particular year. We are not looking at beyond the financial year. And yet, all of us have ended up trying to interpret the budget in a way in which it's broader, about its implications, about what it does for the structure of employment as a whole, about the wage policy, about social security, about the linkages between the micro and macro, where is the local in this. So it's been a wide-ranging discussion. I think some of the, it points to the fact that we need to have an employment policy, first of all, that sets out these issues, provides a roadmap and gives us greater clarity. But I think now we'll go to the questions. I think we have, do I go to the questions asked online, or would any participant want to ask directly?
Sunil sir has asked a question. Sir, would you like to come and ask? Professor Sunil Ray.
It was more of a comment. There's more of a comment. He says, good to hear about the critical analysis of the budget allocation, but more interested on hearing its implications for employment creation, sustainable livelihood of the majority of Indians. I think that's what we have been discussing in subsequent presentations. Any others who want to ask a question? From the audience, please.
Right, ma'am, there are a few questions by Nagarjan.
Yeah.
And that mostly on education and NGO, not very pertinent.
Yeah.
But ma'am, why don't you go ahead and you can ask question to the panelist on some nitty-gritty.
Yeah. I think one of the things that I would like to ask the panelists is that would you, if you were to have the power to frame, the budget in a different way, what are the 3 top priorities that you would, highlight? What would you do if you were actually in a position to set out your priorities? What are the top 3 priorities that you would give, which are implementable within the financial year that we are talking about? Because it's good to have policy statements about what should happen in the long run, what ought to happen, the roadmap. Next 25 years, if the FM takes a road of 25 years, then we are lost because we have to think about this year, this financial year. So what is it that you would do? 3 is just a number, but at least the top 3 that are there on your mind as to what you would have done differently. Can we have some response, please, in the same order, or we'll start from the reverse order? Dr. Sonia George?
Right. Sonia, ma'am? Ma'am, till that, let me also add a few questions. Yeah. You talked about policy, and for few years it has been lingering. The National Employment Policy, I have also been associated with it, but every now and then there is more of announcement. This time also Sonia ma'am also touched upon on e-Shram. So in every budget there is some announcement of some sort for database and policy. So if panelists can also see that how to use the opportunity of budget for signaling in that direction. So Sonia ma'am, are you there?
Yeah, I am here.
Yeah, please go ahead.
No, while I was mentioning one of the contradictions that reflected while I was looking at the e-Shram portal was that through the e-Shram scheme, the government says that it will pay the employees share of the employees provident fund through the e-Shram portal, means for the salaried people, means who are under 15,000 a month. But these people are not part of the EPF, or majority of the unorganized sector are not, means they are not member of these schemes. That is what even the Social Security Code very clearly pointed out. So that means these are contradictions. Means how could the government pay their part in terms of contribution? So these are some of the the clarity that we actually need from the government. And also one of the things that again we had to notice, means many a time the convergence of different schemes is not at all discussed in the budgets. That is really affecting the real life of the people. Means, for example, we talk about single window clearance systems and those kind of accesses that the poor people in this country had through these portals. But when you talk about means majority of the budget talk about a digital India, means that is the focus of the country in the next 25 years when India reaches means 100 years of independence. That means who are going to benefit from this digital platforms that we are talking about, and this majority of the people are out of this.
Dr. Sonia, sorry, Dr. Sonia, just to say that would you be able to say top 3 things if you had the power to do something about the budget?
Pardon?
Top 3 priorities that you would have liked to see in the budget if you were given the power to frame the budget today. What are the 3 things you would have done?
Yeah. No, I think especially in the context of the pandemic, the main allocation to the budget should go to support the poor, means the informal sector of the country through income support schemes and social security schemes. That could be the first priority that could happen. And the second thing, in terms of the country should have a proper employment policy that we have been talking about, generating employment from the local resources and from the local economy, that boosting local economy through local livelihood mechanisms and using the natural resources. That would be the second one. And the third one is looking at the women, means looking at the women workforce and the women in the country, means how are you going to, means in the context of increasing patriarchy and violence, how are we going to support, means none of those schemes are there in the budget, frankly speaking. So
thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. May I ask Dr. Amrita now, please, your top 3 priorities?
I certainly have 2. I think one would be an employment-centric agenda for growth, like I mentioned. It has to be rooted in statistics and facts. You have to take into account demand levels from even pre-pandemic. Again, pandemic-induced, pain. And going forward in the next 5 to 10 years, what are the priority sectors you want to increase, employment in? What is the income security you want to give these workers?
This budget, what would you have done if you had the chance?
I have been tracking and studying the MSME sector for a while. So I'm going to say the MSMEs, a lot of scope to do so much more. For instance, formalization efforts have been ongoing for a while now. They keep changing these efforts incrementally. They call it by a different name each time. So Udyog Aadhar Memorandum, a formalization portal, became Udyam in 3-4 years. It's largely done nothing. It's effectively the same portal. Again, for self-certifying, voluntary certification of,
Would you have given more to the micro enterprises support?
They've extended the CLGS to MS.
What would you have done? I'm asking, what would you have done?
I would have, instead of going for credit-based initiatives, gone for support, wage support, for instance, wage subsidies, income support, give them money to then drive demand instead of constantly pushing forth credit. I think that would have been the agenda.
Any other that you would like to plan?
No, I think just these.
Okay, thank you. Radhika?
So to begin with, I think, in terms of the focus on the capex, I would have said not necessarily increase the outlay by 2 lakh crores. It could have been done by a smaller amount, and that remaining amount could have been allocated to social sector spending and to NREGA. But even within that increased allocation of capex, what I would have said is that, maybe identify 10 to 15 infrastructure projects that have a short gestation period that can kick in quickly, and those which are actually rooted at a more local level, instead of, building grand highways and airports and ports. Because, by focusing on the local community, by giving projects which involve the local community, the local contractors, that multiplier effect would have been played out more quickly, and it would have generated also demand in the rural area. So a little bit of prioritization in the capex expenditure vis-a-vis what are the projects that can give the maximum bang for the buck in terms of job creation involving the local communities. That would be one. The second, there is, given that there is a huge problem of youth unemployment, and there is a lot of despondency at this point, and some of the measures taken will take a while to kick in. As a signaling, I think it would have been a good idea to introduce something like, the hiring subsidies, which were introduced in the 2017 budget, where they said that if you were doing a job for the first time, if you were a new worker, then for the first 3 years, the government could pay the employer's contribution of EPF. That was the Pradhan Mantri Rozgar Protsahan Yojanas. I mean, something along this line. again, it's an active labor market policy, but a hiring subsidy for at least 1 to 2 years to give this signaling that, look, this is a problem that the government is concerned and is willing to bet it put its money into to address. The third, I already mentioned the increased allocation of NREGA. In terms of the ECLGS scheme, what I would have liked to do is basically, of course, enhance the allocation for ECLGS, because that additional 50,000 crores right now is just for the hospitality sector, hospitality and related sectors, but there are other sectors which are very much hurting. And given that this is a credit guarantee scheme, this would have not had really, the implications on the fiscal budget at this point. What I would have also done is then disentangle the micro enterprises from this scheme and announced a separate support package for them. And again, linked that support to a job preservation scheme, like was actually seen in many advanced countries. Now, I know this is challenging because a lot of the workforce is informal in nature, but there are always creative ways of coming around these and linking it to your wage, because that also gives money in the hands of the people. Because while we are saying things like direct income support, a cash transfer is something which is very challenging to do, and there'll be always issues about whether you're reaching the intended beneficiaries and whether the quantum of that transfer is indeed adequate or not. And also rationalization of tariffs. I think that part of the speech was enormously confusing, increasing the tariffs on umbrellas, reducing it on something else, rationalizing the import tariffs to ensure that we can pursue a strategy of export promotion, given that domestic demand is a problem. And going back to e-Shram, I think e-Shram is a good step in the sense that we are at least making a step towards registering unorganized workers. And we really can't implement any schemes unless we have that portal, that information of unorganized workers in place. But I think some sort of statement along the lines of how this is just the registration, and the mere registration doesn't mean that you have access to social security. So some allocation towards social security, especially for those who are at the absolute bottom and are not capable of contributing, making social security contributions, what plan, what strategy the government has vis-a-vis designing that social security scheme. That would have been one more thing to add. So some of these things could have simply been done as intent, but to signal that the government really does care.
Thank you very much, Radhika. Sandhya, are you there? It's your turn now.
So yeah, this is a grand platform that you're given us to give us our set of strategies. I would think that we should work actually on two sides of the problem. If we were to work on the budget, one, if you look at the tax revenue space, I would think we should have pushed ourselves very hard. And right now, if you look at wealth inequalities, I think that was a fundamental problem we would have tried to work on. Taxes on properties would really require a bolstering. If you look at it, it's currently only trying to tax the security transaction tax as the only point. We should have seen much more. In fact, wealth taxation in some form should have been introduced to augment tax revenue. Secondly, if you look at the revenue receipts as well, there is a problem about how there are visible cesses raised in the case of education, health, for Madhyamik Shiksha Yojana, Prathamik, or you can say secondary healthcare, etc., etc. Those will require to be mindfully employed. So on the one side, we have to be very serious about what is coming in terms of revenue receipts and capital receipts, both in terms of wealth inequality reduction and social services. On the other hand, if you look at the logic of budgeting, I would have followed that more closely. The health expenditures had gone up to 73,000 crores between in 2021-22. From the budget estimates to revised estimates, there's been a huge increase over there. But in terms of budget estimates in 2022-23, it's been brought down to 46,000 crores. Obviously, we should be following a certain logical path of maintaining at least what was left in the last year instead of withdrawing that much money out. So that's a second point, follow the logic of numbers. Third point, since urban poverty was partially addressed by the government by giving food security to the poor, trying to give some basic rights, which was extended till October 2021. If I were the finance minister, I would have put a lot of money into food security, pull out something from the capex. And if you look at the budget on nutrition, it has come down by about 20%. And even urban food security allocations have come down significantly. So I wouldn't really say that we require architects to do this job. What we require is economic logic. And the last point is urban housing would have been my focus, because that's exactly where our migration problem needs to be addressed. And that's exactly where, again, urban housing allocations have come down. So I think I would have at least tried to play with my numbers in a little more mindful way. Thank you.
But there's some 70 lakh houses or some big number that are going to be constructed, don't you think?
Again, if I follow what Radhika said, if they were to be constructed tomorrow and we have given day after tomorrow, I would have lauded the process. But I don't think housing is generated in 2 days, right? So no matter how many things are being committed under the Awas Yojanas, urban area would have been my focal area to correct the problem, because that's where the weaknesses in the policy making seem to be vesting.
I think
revised number at 28,000 crores for urban housing. Yeah, quite high. But anyways, Seeta ma'am, yes.
No, I just thought that from my side, I would have liked to see the food security part ensured for the workers for another year or two at least, because that's where the really the distress lies. And once the food is assured, and we have enough surplus of food grains, I think it could have been easily done. And second is some incentive to employers to retain workers and to support their wages. Many countries have done that. To provide during the, Bangladesh has given some income support for garment workers and to see that they're not dislodged. I think some support for the, especially for the small sector, for the micro sector, to retain workers and to be able to employ them. Whether it's in terms of Provident Fund, because there are many of them not registered, so that I would not know, but at least that. And third is to speed up this registration of workers and to ensure that they get some benefit for that. And just registering and then leaving them aside would not help. So I would really think, and I truly feel that we need a policy for employment, and it's just not bits and pieces do not add up to policy. And there are enough fine minds in this country and abroad who can help us to formulate such a policy which is equitable and which is people-centered. Now, right now, the people seem to be left aside and the country seems to be marching ahead. Now, if there is a dichotomy between the economy and the people, then it doesn't work. And most of the social welfare policies in the West, in Europe as well as the US, have started because of distress and because there was a fear that unless it is addressed, it can lead to social unrest. So I think that is a real fear now. It's a clear division between the haves and the have-nots, which I would like, which needs to be addressed. Now, having said that, there are some questions that have come in, one or two that we could take. What is the reason behind the reduction of tax rate on diamonds, and what can't we include? Why can't we include agriculture? I think this diamonds part needs no special answer. If anyone wants to comment on it, any of the panelists. I think it just shows the bias of the government to encourage the diamond industry, perhaps in Surat and other places. I think, there's a question that has come in, Nagarajan Krishnamurthy. Is there a need to change the education system and pattern to have semi-skilled, multi-skilled, technical quality labor force in our country, since we generally have unskilled and low-skilled workers? So that's one. And the second is, why not NGOs be registered as contractors to perform the asset creation and maintenance of at least local governments? Both are very relevant questions. Any last thoughts of the panel? Open to everyone. First one is, should we change our education system to have a mix of semi-skilled, multi-skilled, technical quality labor force in the country, in the sense that match the skills to the jobs that are occurring, in a very successful example of South Korea that you can see. And why not NGOs be registered as contractors? I mean, that's another excellent thing. Bangladesh has done a lot with, large NGOs like BRAC. So I think Professor Sunil Ray has been raising his hand. So we have Dr. Ray, could you please ask your question? Yeah. Sorry, I missed that.
Please unmute yourself also, Sunil sir. So please unmute yourself.
Okay, can you hear me now?
We can hear.
Yeah. This is, thank you, Professor Seeta Prabhu. I just thought of joining only to listen to the enlightened panelists to enrich my knowledge about this all. I never had an intention of participating, but then once it's being asked, the reply, I'm interested, so I thought I just speak about. a bit of all that. I felt so happy to hear every one of you, every of the participants. But I am wondering about one thing. Trying to be very non-technical and putting the question straight. Had there been no budget, the same panelist, including myself, I'm talking about, would have raised the same issues, same questions by and large. Now there is a budget. Had there been no budget, I think the issues, concerns being raised by the panelists, all are extraordinarily fantastic, convincing, and systematic thought being given. All are important. But now budget is there, and the same things are being expressed by and large. Exception here and there is there, but otherwise same. If same Seeta, Professor Seeta Prabhu would have expressed the same thing as I am doing now. Now there is a budget. Now, for example, you talk about inequality. We have been talking. We are in this profession. We have been talking about growing inequality. We are talking about unemployment, frightening unemployment rate. Not only that, in India, all over 142 countries, recently EPW published a paper by Prof. Guan, the IMPRI has got this one, I got it from them. And they said the 142 countries, all employment is going down, everywhere. Unemployment problem is soaring up. India is not an exception to that. Impoverization, that's poverty. We are talking about malnutrition, poor health, basic needs, unfulfilled basic needs, and all this social insecurity, all this being talked about, all are we are talking about. Now, budget is here, and budget has not attended primarily any of them substantially, not at all, very marginal, incremental here and there. Okay, fine, that's all understood. My question is that, why? Why is it that budget has not addressed these issues? You have an agriculture. You have the millions of farmers sitting on the road for doing something. Nowhere, no mention, anything of that kind. Not to talk about this one in the farming community, the agriculture and all that, everything together. So why is it that budget is silent on all these issues that you are talking about? Is it that you are expecting the budget is going to reduce our inequality, reduce our impoverization, increase in employment and all that? No. None of the speakers did talk about, hinted at that something of that kind going to happen. Even without budget also, this same thing would have been done. My question is that why is it that budget has not addressed it? It's a very basic fundamental question. It is economics. Somebody said that is not economics, outside economics. Yes, if it is a politics, if there is politics, let us say it is a politics. What kind of politics it is? Let us put it straight. What kind of politics it is? Now the question is that this government very explicitly made in many places, if I am wrong, please correct me, that doing business or industry or this kind of thing is not government job. It's the job of the private sector, the corporate sector, the capital, not the government. Now, if you leave the whole thing to the private sector or corporate sector, or in other words, a market economy invite for everything, to solve every problem, right from unemployment to food security, everything, education, health, and everything, you leave it to the market to decide as to what is going to happen, then why do you need a budget of this kind? The kind that you are looking forward. Let us put it straight. Let us try to understand. Incremental benefit here and there, you increase something from here to there, this percent has declined, this should have been increased and all that, that's all understood. But why do I expect, I do not know, I'm asking this question, what reason that I have got to expect that this budget, you need to have a budget of a kind which is completely devoid of the market economy? Now you have a market economics, Keynesian economics you have. The Keynesian dose is completely has become irrelevant. Look at the Great Recession that has been taking place there for several months, several years. Infused government money, public money to the system, to the market economy to save the corporate sector, to save the capitalism. But still the problem has been soaring up. It's not really going away. So is it that the Keynesian economics has failed? I don't know. Somebody should say. But beyond Keynes, you are not able to think anything. Now, welfareism. What is that welfareism now? After 25 years of globalization, welfareism, all this social security, all these kinds of things, by and large, you're talking around the welfareism, not even talking about a structural change of the society and economy. Never. And do you think that this structure, without changing the structure of the economy, of a kind where the kinds of concern that every one of us has got will be met, is it that going to take place through this kind of a budget? Not at all. If that is not the case, I think we should call spade a spade. And that is something which is they're going to fighting 25% bana do, or 25% ठीक नहीं है, 30% bana do. You know, something, this kind of things going on. Is it going to reduce the problem? No. So the question is that, now I came across a literature, and a very, very famous person has written, economics has written. And that has been story every one of you know. Everybody, right from 11 college days, I have been saying demand generation. Demand has to be generated. Money has to be given in the pockets of the people. True. That is within the market economy, this is the only way out through which you can address the problem of income generation, or demand generation, and therefore growth and development and so on and so forth. That is what the paradigm is all about. We are talking about it, but then where is that about? The budget has not really addressed that issue in a very systematic manner. Everybody knows about it, and why should it do? If the budget is meant for doing something for capital sector, for what's called corporate sector, and for market economy of that kind dominated with the corporate capital, then why these budgets we should expect from the budget something great that we are thinking about? I think we should say call a spade, we should draw a line between the two. And because the concerns are absolutely fantastic, correct, I'm completely with the panelists and agreeable. But my problem is somewhere, maybe there's somebody can enlighten me, I can get rid of this problem, that it is possible you can go ahead with this kind of thing slowly, gradually, but we have already 75 years completed, and statistically speaking, I have got papers also published, 70% of the people in India living in what is called, some are abject poverty, some in tangent poverty, some are very, very difficult situation. Nobody knows, especially during the time of what is called pandemic, we could learn the 40 crores of population is vulnerable. 40 crores, that is 1/3 of the total, sorry, 2/3 of the total population, 40 crores, 40 or 44 crores, I have forgotten, they're absolutely vulnerable. Now, this is the kind of India that you have today in after 75 years of independence. Now, tell me, where do you go? Thank you so much.
Professor Ray, I think you brought in a very, very, important issue of the paradigm within which we are operating. I mean, the budgets have been presented within a paradigm which is completely market-oriented, and it's a right-wing government. So one cannot expect much more than what they have done. What you say is right. But if any of the panelists have any comment on this, how do we change the structure? The structure will change. You're asking political economy. You're asking political economy questions, and the political economy is given when a government is elected. So there is an election process that has taken place, and we have exercised the votes, and the majority has selected this government with a particular orientation. So if the orientation has to change, then we have to have much more action on the ground. And that's why I was hinting at it, that social unrest, I think we can continue on a individual plane. We both have had debates earlier also. I think the main thing is that if the structure has to change, I mean, either I was hinting at it, saying that social unrest will break out, and for political reasons, then it will become imperative for the governments, for their survival, to pay greater attention to the poor. I mean, this is one thing that will happen, but it's a more tumultuous route that we will be taking. To expect a welfare-oriented budget from a right-wing government is a bit, what you say is right, is a bit too far-fetched. So any of the panelists who want to comment on this, we get 1 minute each, please, because I think we need to conclude now. Anyone who wants to say something?
Sandhya ma'am, raised hand.
No, actually, these are important pointers. In fact, in one of our recent papers on the status of social dialogue in India, let me again put it on table that when I evaluated the status of how many countries enhance the minimum wages of workers during COVID-19 times, several of the so-called right-wing countries in the emerging economies have worked and tried to enhance the minimum wages and control the fall of workers below poverty. And that paper actually talks about how countries have to continue the tripartite process, and governments playing a more important role in this process. So I would not try to give a very grim understanding that governments in the right-wing ideology cannot think about workers. That's the first point. And secondly, there's also the budget is a statement of political will, the nature in which governments need to take charge of the problem. Currently, if you ask me, the budget is only trying to put the cart before the horse and trying to say that, yes, it will pull it through and we will come out of the problem. But if the horse is itself weak, no matter which direction, it's going to be static. And in that sense, the post-budget statement, which our Honorable Finance Minister said, is that I didn't try to do much and I was only trying to do so much. And that clearly says that they didn't really come with a vision. They only worked on allocating resources on certain templates to fill it up. They didn't really have a vision statement for the first time. Neither is the economic survey talking about what is the vision, nor is the budget statement telling anything about what is the ideation. So frankly to say, we have several contemporary emerging economies which continue to maintain the welfare orientation for their workers, trying to sort it out. If you look at Indonesia, if you look at Vietnam, if you look at, for that matter, even you look at Sri Lanka, despite the prevalent food security issue, minimum wages of workers were guaranteed to be paid during COVID times, even when they were laid off. So we do have a lot of neighboring countries. We have associational regions where all this is going on. Our country, we seem to be constantly lying behind the shadow of, yes, growth first, everything later. We seem to be going back to the Kuznets curve that trickle down will happen sooner or later, even if we don't create mechanisms for the same. I think I would really want to keep a more positivist attitude that even right-wingism can guarantee welfare. But accountability needs to be maintained. And I think for the last 30 years, we have been hearing rising informality from 92% to 97%. I think we need to now try to create mechanisms to reduce that and see if sometime during our lifetime, informality comes down to at least 90% or at least 82%. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else who wants to say a word? 1 minute only, please, now. I think we need to conclude.
I quickly say something. I completely see and understand what Professor Ray is saying, but in terms of why one had these expectations from the budget, why would a right-wing government care for the welfare of workers? I think that there is an economic rationale to it. Like I said, there is a problem of aggregate demand in the economy. And that's why hearing leaders of corporate India saying increase allocation on welfare schemes like NREGA. So there is a very strong economic rationale to care for what's happening to the workers, to care for what's happening to the bottom half beyond even your political considerations. And that's why I expected to hear something along these lines. And this problem of aggregate demand is only going to get worse going forward in this changing world of work, where we're talking about machines taking, and it's not going to be something just for emerging and developing economies. I mean, that's the context of the discussion of even universal basic income in the advanced world, the macroeconomic problem of aggregate demand, which will become very serious. And that's why I expected them to care for welfare of workers' wages.
Thanks, Ranika. I think even if it is instrumentalist reasons, I think, employers should care about it. Anyone else?
I'll just take a minute to say that I had mentioned earlier that the central challenge to regulating a sector like the labor market is how you ensure sufficient rights for workers while also facilitating, driving, spurring firm output and growth. But this is, you have to straddle these two objectives very carefully. And for that, you need to set forth, like Dr. Sandhya said, a vision, a 5 or 10 year or, a certain plan that you're working towards. Incremental changes, incremental schemes that you bring about are not going to do that. You need a policy orientation. Now, a good thing has been done. You've come up with codes. That is the architecture that's going to govern these things. But now you need to start implementing, because that is really the tricky part. It's left to the states also. So yeah.
I think we can conclude now, Dr. Arjun Kumar.
Yes, ma'am.
I think, yeah.
With your concluding.
Yeah. Thank you very much, all the panelists. Sandhya, you wanted to say something, is it? No. I think we have had enough of a discussion. We are all seem to be, agreed on the fact that the government has not done enough on the budget. There is no vision, there is no plan, and these capital expenditures When they will actually fructify into increased employment is anyone's guess. And it has also not taken into account the federal structure to the extent that it ought to have. And if the orientation of the government to continue to focus on the capital expenditure and not bother anything about revenue expenditure and about the poor, there's a complete absence of any schemes for the poor, for the marginalized, and to ensure reasonable, decent living and decent livelihoods. I think that's a big, big drawback. And we ought to keep up our efforts constantly to see that there is enough of discussion, dialogue that happens to help focus on the issue and build up a momentum on that. So thank you very much, all of you. It's been a very lively discussion. Thank you, Professor Ray, for your very deep and insightful comments. Thank you.
Thank you so much, ma'am. So to formally give a vote of thanks to this very enriching deliberation, now I invite Khwahish.
As we come to an end of this extremely enriching and enlightening lecture, I, Khwahish Katyan, researcher at IMPRI, Impact and Policy Research Institute, New Delhi, would like to formally propose a vote of thanks on behalf of the IMPRI Center for Work and Welfare. We are grateful to Professor Seeta Prabhu for taking out the time for being with us and sharing such a thought-provoking and enriching talk on employment, livelihoods, and urban budget 2022-2023, and steering the panel with her skilled guidance. Thank you, ma'am. We thank our panelists, Dr. Amrita Pillai, Dr. Sandhya Iyer, Dr. Sonia George, and Professor Ranika Kapoor for adding their diverse perspectives and valuable insights to the deliberation. And of course, we thank all our participants who are here on Zoom and on Facebook Live for participating and raising pertinent questions. We are also grateful if you're watching us later on YouTube or listening to us on our podcast. Thank you again, and I hope you continue to tune in on future episodes of the State of Employment and Livelihood debate, employment debate series. We also invite you to join us for more of our upcoming discussions on the Union Budget 2022, which are scheduled for the upcoming days, as well as our other web policy talks. Thank you, and I wish you all a very good day.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.